Welcome to the Humanized Books channel. Today we will start a series of mini-books on frames, influence, and negotiation. If you want to learn how to say no without feeling guilty, sell effectively, conduct confident dialogues, and generally emerge victorious from negotiations, this is a must-read list. Number one book on the series is Start with No: The Negotiating Tools That the Pros Don't Want You to Know by Jim Camp. The number one America's negotiating coach explains why win-win is an ineffective, a disastrous strategy, and how you can beat it. Most people think negotiation is about getting what you want. But what if the real reason negotiations fail isn't strategy or intelligence or confidence, but the simple fact that you want the outcome too badly? What if chasing yes is the fastest way to lose control? In this audiobook, you're not going to learn tricks, scripts, or clever lines. You're going to learn something far more uncomfortable and far more powerful: how to remove emotional pressure from your decisions, how to stop negotiating against yourself, and how to walk away calmly when something doesn't fit. This is not about winning arguments. It's about protecting your time, your energy, and your future. If you've ever agreed too quickly, explained too much, or stayed in conversations that drained you, this is for you. Slow down, listen carefully. Because once you understand why starting with no changes everything, you'll never approach decisions the same way again. Let's begin. Introduction: Why win-win fails and why no is power. Most people approach negotiation with the same quiet fear. They want agreement, they want approval, they want to avoid tension. So they aim for yes as quickly as possible, believing that a fast yes means success. Jim Camp argues that this instinct is exactly what causes people to lose. Start with No is built on a simple but uncomfortable truth. The moment you need a yes, you have already given up control. Neediness distorts judgment. It makes people rush, concede, explain too much, and accept terms they do not fully understand or truly want. In negotiation, need is weakness, even when disguised as enthusiasm or cooperation. Camp's system does not teach manipulation. It teaches discipline. It is not about winning at someone else's expense. It is about protecting yourself from emotional traps that lead to bad decisions. The core idea is counterintuitive. When you remove the pressure to reach agreement, better agreements become possible. No is not rejection in Camp's framework. It is safety. It is clarity. It is the beginning of real conversation. When someone says no, they feel protected. When you allow no, you reduce resistance. When you are comfortable walking away, you negotiate from strength rather than fear. This book rejects popular myths about win-win outcomes, quick compromises, and positive thinking as negotiation strategies. Camp shows that control over outcome is an illusion. The only real control you have is over your preparation, your emotions, and your decisions. Throughout this mini-book, you will learn how professional negotiators think differently, how they remove emotion from the process, how they identify real decision-makers, how they uncover hidden problems instead of chasing surface agreements, and most importantly, how they avoid bad deals, which is the true definition of success. Negotiation is not something that happens only in boardrooms. It happens in careers, relationships, finances, boundaries, and daily choices. Learning how to start with no is not about becoming aggressive. It is about becoming calm, patient, and unshakable. If you can walk away, you are free. If you need agreement, you are trapped. This is where the discipline begins. Chapter 1: The Dangers of Neediness. Every failed negotiation begins in the same place: need. Jim Camp does not use the word lightly. Need is not desire. It is not interest. It is not motivation. Need is emotional attachment to a specific outcome. The moment you decide that an agreement must happen, your position weakens, your thinking narrows, your patience collapses. And without realizing it, you begin negotiating against yourself. Most people do not recognize need when it appears. They feel it as urgency, as excitement, as optimism, as the belief that this has to work. In reality, need is fear dressed up as hope: fear of losing the deal, fear of missing the opportunity, fear of confrontation, fear of starting over. Camp argues that the other side senses this immediately. You do not need to say it out loud. Your tone changes. You talk more. You explain instead of listening. You answer questions that were never asked. You justify your value. You rush to compromise. The other side may not consciously analyze these signals, but they respond to them instinctively. They slow down. They push harder. They wait for you to give more. This is how bad deals are made. Traditional negotiation advice often encourages enthusiasm, positivity, and early agreement. Camp rejects this entirely. He insists that calm detachment is not coldness, it is clarity. When you are emotionally neutral, you see information instead of projecting hopes. You hear what is actually being said instead of what you want to hear. Need distorts reality. When you need the deal, you stop evaluating whether the deal is good. You stop asking hard questions. You overlook warning signs. You accept vague answers. You confuse movement with progress. A meeting feels productive simply because it did not collapse. A conversation feels successful because no one said no. Camp's first discipline is brutal but freeing: eliminate need. This does not mean eliminate ambition. It means eliminate dependency. You must be willing to walk away, not as a tactic, but as a truth. If walking away feels impossible, you are not negotiating. You are hoping. Professionals do not hope. They prepare. Camp emphasizes that need always comes from internal pressure, not external conditions. You may tell yourself that deadlines, bosses, money, or competition force you to act, but the pressure is still internal. It is your reaction to the situation, not the situation itself, that creates need. This is why preparation matters more than persuasion. When you prepare correctly, you define your mission and purpose before the negotiation begins. You know what success looks like. You know what failure looks like. And most importantly, you know what walking away looks like. This clarity removes desperation. You are no longer chasing approval. You are evaluating fit. One of Camp's most important insights is that the person who needs the deal less controls the process. This is not dominance. It is balance. When both sides feel free to say no, real negotiation can begin. When one side needs yes, the conversation becomes uneven. Need also corrupts listening. When you need agreement, you listen selectively. You hear confirmation and ignore contradiction. You interpret silence as approval. You mistake politeness for alignment. Camp warns that this leads people to believe they have an agreement long before one exists. The cure is emotional discipline. Camp teaches negotiators to slow everything down, to remove emotional language, to avoid enthusiasm, to ask neutral questions, to remain comfortable with silence. These behaviors are not tricks. They are signs that you are not attached to outcome. When you are calm, the other side relaxes. When they relax, they reveal information. Information, not persuasion, is the currency of negotiation. This chapter sets the foundation for everything that follows. If you cannot eliminate need, no technique will save you. Scripts will fail. Strategies will collapse. You will sabotage yourself without realizing it. But if you can release the pressure to win, something unexpected happens. You become patient. You become curious. You become dangerous in the quietest way possible. Because now, you are free to say no. Chapter 2. Secret of being able to walk away. If Chapter 1 exposes the danger of neediness, Chapter 2 delivers the antidote, the ability to walk away. Jim Camp insists that this is not a tactic. It is not a bluff. It is not something you threaten with. It is an internal position you must genuinely hold before any negotiation begins. If you cannot walk away, you do not have leverage. You have hope. And hope is fragile. Most people misunderstand walking away. They imagine confrontation, loss, or failure. Camp reframes it completely. Walking away is not quitting. It is choosing not to accept a bad deal. It is choosing clarity over comfort. It is choosing long-term success over short-term relief. The moment you believe you must close the deal, the other side controls you. Professional negotiators reverse this dynamic by removing urgency from their own side. They do not rush. They do not fill silence. They do not rescue stalled conversations. They allow space. They allow discomfort. They allow no. This changes everything. When you can walk away, your questions become cleaner, your listening becomes sharper, your tone becomes neutral. You stop selling and start observing. The negotiation becomes less about persuasion and more about discovery. Camp emphasizes that freedom comes from preparation, not confidence. You do not wake up suddenly able to walk away. You earn that ability by defining your mission and purpose in advance. You decide, before the conversation starts, what success means and what failure looks like. You decide what terms are unacceptable. You decide what conditions would make you leave calmly. This preparation removes emotional volatility. Without it, people negotiate reactively. They adjust their standards mid-conversation. They compromise in response to pressure rather than information. They accept ambiguity because clarity feels risky. Walking away feels dramatic only when you are unprepared. When prepared, walking away feels neutral. Camp also dismantles the idea that leverage comes from power, money, or authority. True leverage comes from indifference to outcome. The side that can wait, pause, or leave holds the advantage. This does not mean being cold or arrogant. It means being unattached. Attachment creates urgency. Urgency creates mistakes. One of Camp's most practical insights is that walking away often improves the deal without you ever leaving. When the other side senses that you are not dependent, they relax. They stop posturing. They begin revealing real constraints, real fears, and real problems. Negotiation shifts from surface demands to underlying issues. But this only works if the willingness to walk away is real. People often pretend to be indifferent while internally panicking. This never works. Human beings detect incongruence instantly. Your body language, tone, and pacing betray you. Camp insists that emotional discipline must be genuine. Walking away also protects you from false victories. Many agreements feel good in the moment and become disasters later. People celebrate closure and regret terms. Camp defines success differently. Success is not agreement. Success is avoiding bad agreements. A deal you walk away from can be a win if it protects your time, energy, and future options. This mindset applies far beyond business. In careers, walking away may mean declining roles that compromise values. In relationships, it may mean refusing dynamics built on pressure. In daily life, it may mean saying no to commitments that drain you. Negotiation for Camp is a life skill rooted in self-respect. The power to walk away restores balance. It slows the process. It replaces anxiety with observation. It transforms no from a threat into a foundation. When you can walk away, you stop chasing yes. When you stop chasing yes, negotiation finally begins. Chapter 3: How No Moves Negotiations Forward. Most people treat no as failure. They hear it as rejection, resistance, or disrespect. They rush to avoid it, soften it, or talk past it. Jim Camp argues that this fear of no is one of the most destructive habits negotiators develop. Not because no is dangerous, but because misunderstanding no keeps conversations shallow and dishonest. In Camp's system, no is not the end of negotiation. It is the beginning. Yes is emotionally loaded. When someone says yes, expectations appear instantly. Pressure follows. Commitment is assumed even when clarity is missing. People say yes to be polite, to escape tension, or to buy time. Yes often hides uncertainty. No does the opposite. No is clear. No is safe. No is honest. When someone says no, they feel protected. They feel in control. They are not committing to anything they do not fully understand. Camp teaches that people are most relaxed and truthful when they are free to say no. This insight changes how every conversation unfolds. Instead of pushing for agreement, professional negotiators invite no. They structure questions that allow the other side to decline safely. This reduces resistance. When people do not feel trapped, they stop defending positions and start revealing problems. Camp emphasizes that negotiation is not about convincing. It is about uncovering information. You cannot solve a problem you do not understand. And people do not reveal problems when they feel pressured to agree. This is why Camp discourages closing language early in conversations. Phrases that imply agreement, commitment, or urgency trigger fear. Fear leads to politeness or deception. No one wants to disappoint, so they say yes while thinking no. Camp would rather hear no immediately than yes that collapses later. When someone says no, you gain data. You learn where the boundary is. You learn what does not work. You learn what they are protecting. No creates structure. It narrows the field. It removes ambiguity. In contrast, chasing yes creates illusion. Many negotiations feel successful because both sides remain friendly and optimistic. Meetings end with vague alignment. Emails suggest progress. Time passes. Nothing moves. Camp calls this false momentum. It wastes energy and delays reality. No cuts through this. Camp teaches negotiators to ask questions that allow the other side to say no comfortably. Not trick questions. Neutral questions. Questions that respect autonomy. This signals confidence and patience. It tells the other side that you are not desperate. When people feel safe, they talk. Another critical insight is that no is reversible. Yes is not. When someone says no, the conversation can continue. Circumstances can change. Understanding can deepen. Solutions can emerge. But when someone says yes prematurely, it creates pressure to perform even when conditions are unclear. This leads to renegotiation, resentment, or failure. Camp prefers progress built on clarity rather than optimism. He also points out that many people mistake persuasion for negotiation. Persuasion tries to move someone from no to yes. Negotiation tries to understand why no exists in the first place. One is forceful. The other is investigative. The professional mindset is curious, not convincing. This chapter also introduces an important emotional discipline, comfort with silence. After no is spoken, many people rush to fill the gap. They explain, defend, or soften. Camp teaches the opposite. When no appears, pause. Let it stand. Observe the reaction. Silence often invites elaboration. This is not manipulation. It is restraint. Restraint signals confidence. Confidence reduces tension. Reduced tension reveals truth. No also protects you. When you accept no without reaction, you preserve your own position. You do not chase approval. You do not trade value for comfort. You stay grounded in your mission and purpose. This makes it easier to walk away if needed. Camp's system reframes success entirely. Success is not agreement. Success is clarity. Sometimes clarity ends in agreement. Sometimes it ends in no. Both are acceptable outcomes if they are honest. Negotiation becomes less emotional when no is normalized. When you stop fearing no, you stop negotiating against yourself. You stop overcommitting. You stop guessing. You begin operating from information rather than hope. No does not stop the conversation. No makes the conversation real. Chapter 4. Success comes from mission and purpose. Most negotiations fail long before anyone speaks. They fail because the negotiator does not know why they are there. Jim Camp makes a sharp distinction between goals and mission. Goals are outcomes. Mission is direction. Goals are external and often uncontrollable. Mission is internal and always within your control. Confusing the two creates pressure, confusion, and emotional instability. A goal might be to close a deal, get a raise, or reach agreement. A mission is to discover whether a deal makes sense, to protect long-term interests, or to gather clear information. When you negotiate with a goal in mind, you become attached. When you negotiate with a mission, you remain steady. Camp insists that every negotiation must begin with a clearly defined mission and purpose written down before the conversation starts. This is not optional. Without it, emotions take over. With it, you stay grounded regardless of what the other side does. Mission answers a simple question: why am I here? If your mission is unclear, you will chase yes. You will respond emotionally to pressure. You will confuse movement with progress. You will feel lost when the conversation shifts unexpectedly. Mission provides stability when the negotiation becomes uncomfortable. Purpose adds depth to mission. Purpose explains why the mission matters beyond the immediate interaction. It connects negotiation to values, long-term objectives, and personal standards. Purpose prevents you from accepting deals that technically succeed but ethically or strategically fail. Camp emphasizes that mission and purpose must be neutral. They cannot depend on the other side agreeing. A mission that requires yes is not a mission. It is a wish. For example, my mission is to reach an agreement today creates urgency and need. But my mission is to understand whether an agreement is possible and under what conditions creates clarity and patience. This shift is subtle but powerful. When your mission is information-based rather than outcome-based, You become immune to manipulation. Pressure loses its power. Deadlines become data, not threats. Silence becomes space, not discomfort. Camp also warns against borrowed missions. Many negotiators adopt missions imposed by bosses, timelines, or expectations without examining whether they make sense. This leads to internal conflict. You feel rushed, anxious, and reactive because your mission does not align with your judgment. A strong mission aligns with reality, not hope. Another critical insight in this chapter is that mission and purpose apply to life, not just negotiation. Many people live without clear missions. They chase approval, avoid conflict, and react to circumstances. Camp's system trains people to operate intentionally rather than emotionally. When you know your mission, you stop over-explaining. You stop defending. You stop chasing validation. You ask cleaner questions. You listen without agenda. You allow the other side to reveal themselves. Mission also protects against false compromise. Many agreements feel cooperative, but violate mission and purpose. People agree to terms that drain energy, damage reputation, or create future conflict simply to maintain harmony. Camp calls this emotional bargaining. It feels good short-term and costs deeply long-term. A clear mission allows you to say no without guilt, because no is not rejection. It is alignment. Camp teaches that professional negotiators review their mission before every interaction, not once, every time. This repetition builds discipline. It creates consistency. It prevents emotional drift. When things go wrong, mission brings you back to center. When things go well, mission prevents complacency. This chapter marks a turning point in the system. Up to now, we have removed need, embraced walking away, and normalized no. Mission and purpose give structure to those freedoms. Without mission, freedom becomes confusion. With mission, freedom becomes strength. Negotiation is no longer about winning. It becomes about alignment with reality. When you know why you are there, you stop fearing what might happen. Chapter 5. Stop trying to control outcomes. One of the most deeply ingrained habits people bring into negotiation is the desire to control the outcome. They want certainty. They want closure. They want to know how things will end before the conversation even begins. Jim Camp argues that this instinct is not only unrealistic, it is destructive. You cannot control outcomes. You can influence, you can prepare, you can decide how you respond, but the final decision always belongs to the other side. The moment you forget this, negotiation turns into frustration. You push harder. You talk more. You attempt to steer emotions instead of uncovering facts. Control becomes the illusion that drives poor behavior. Camp insists that professionals stop trying to manage results and focus instead on process. Outcome-based thinking creates emotional volatility. When the conversation seems to move toward agreement, you feel relief. When it stalls, you feel anxiety. When resistance appears, you feel threatened. These emotional swings make consistency impossible. You begin reacting instead of observing. Process-based thinking removes this instability. Process is what you can control. Preparation, questions, listening, emotional discipline, timing, silence, mission and purpose. When you commit to process, the outcome becomes information, not validation. Camp explains that control-seeking behavior usually appears in subtle ways. You try to frame the conversation. You push toward solutions too early. You answer questions that were not asked. You present arguments before understanding the problem. You rush to reassure when discomfort appears. All of this signals need. When you try to control the outcome, the other side senses pressure. Pressure triggers resistance. Resistance reduces trust. Trust is replaced by posturing. Now both sides are performing instead of communicating. Camp calls this negotiation theater. Professional negotiators do not perform. They observe. A key principle in this chapter is the concept of the blank slate. Camp teaches that you must enter negotiations without assumptions. No predictions, no expectations, no internal narrative about how things should go. The moment you assume outcome, you stop listening accurately. Assumptions are emotional shortcuts. When you assume interest, you stop testing it. When you assume alignment, you stop asking clarifying questions. When you assume authority, you miss hidden decision makers. Control thinking blinds you to reality. Camp emphasizes that many people confuse preparation with prediction. Preparation is about readiness. Prediction is about fantasy. Professionals prepare without predicting. They are ready for multiple outcomes and attached to none. This is where emotional discipline becomes essential. When you let go of outcome control, you become comfortable with uncertainty. You allow the conversation to unfold naturally. You stop filling silence. You stop rescuing the other side from discomfort. This creates space for truth to surface. Kant points out that the most valuable information often appears after tension, not before it. People reveal constraints when they feel pressure, not when everything feels smooth. If you rush to resolve tension, you lose access to critical data. Trying to control outcomes also damages credibility. When you push too hard toward agreement, you appear invested in something the other side has not yet agreed to. This raises suspicion. They wonder why you care so much. They wonder what you are hiding. They slow down. They protect themselves. In contrast, detachment builds trust. When you show that you are not dependent on a specific result, the other side relaxes. They stop defending positions and begin discussing realities. The negotiation becomes collaborative without being emotional. Camp also challenges the idea that compromise is always virtuous. Compromise often happens when both sides feel pressured to control outcome. Each gives up something without fully understanding the cost. The result is a deal that satisfies neither side long term. True agreement emerges from clarity, not concession. This chapter also applies beyond formal negotiation. In daily life, control-seeking behavior damages relationships. People try to manage how others feel, think, or respond. This creates tension and resentment. Letting go of control creates healthier boundaries and more honest communication. Camp's message is not passive. It is disciplined. Letting go of control does not mean being indifferent. It means being precise about what you are responsible for and what you are not. You are responsible for preparation, emotional regulation, asking clear questions, listening accurately, honoring your mission and purpose. You are not responsible for the other side's decisions, their emotions, their timelines, their approval. Once this distinction is clear, negotiation becomes simpler. You stop chasing outcomes and start managing behavior. You stop forcing agreement and start evaluating fit. You stop fearing no and start welcoming clarity. Control is exhausting. Process is sustainable. When you let go of the illusion of control, you gain something far more powerful. You gain stability. Chapter 6. What do you say? Rules of the camp system. Once you remove need, embrace walking away, normalize, no, define mission, and release control over outcomes, a new problem appears. You still have to speak. Jim Camp argues that language is where most negotiators betray themselves. Not through big mistakes, but through small emotional habits that signal attachment, urgency, or weakness without the speaker realizing it. Words carry pressure. Tone carries intention. Even well-meaning phrases can sabotage discipline. This chapter is about stripping negotiation language down to what is clean, neutral, and effective. Camp begins with a hard truth. Most people talk too much. They explain when they should pause. They persuade when they should listen. They fill silence because silence feels uncomfortable. In doing so, they give away information, weaken their position, and create obligations they did not intend to create. Professional negotiators use fewer words, not more. One of Camp's core rules is to eliminate emotionally loaded language. Words like need, hope, want, fair, reasonable, and deal all carry assumptions. They imply expectation. They invite debate instead of clarity. They pull the conversation toward outcome instead of information. For example, saying, "We need this to work," reveals dependence. Saying, "This seems fair," invites argument. Saying, "This is a great deal," pressures the other side to agree or resist. Camp teaches negotiators to replace emotional language with neutral questions and statements. Instead of asserting value, ask about concerns. Instead of explaining benefits, ask about risks. Instead of pushing forward, ask what might stop progress. This shift feels uncomfortable at first because it removes the illusion of control, but it creates something far more valuable: honesty. Camp introduces the concept of neutral language. Neutral language does not persuade, it does not impress, it does not perform, it observes and invites response. Examples of neutral language include: Teja, how does that affect you? Teja, what happens if this does not work? Teja, what concerns do you have about this? Teja, how do you see this playing out? These questions are not tricks. They are discipline in action. They signal that you are not attached to a specific outcome. They create space for the other side to think rather than defend. Another important rule in this chapter is to avoid future-focused language too early. Talking about timelines, implementation, or next steps before clarity exists creates false momentum. It gives the impression of agreement where none exists. Camp warns that premature future language is a form of self-deception. People say things like "when we move forward" or "once this is agreed," to maintain optimism. In reality, this creates pressure and masks unresolved issues. Professionals stay in the present. They deal with what is known, not what is hoped. Silence is another tool Camp emphasizes. Most people treat silence as a problem to solve. Camp treats it as a signal to listen. After asking a neutral question, professionals stop talking. They allow silence to do its work. Silence often reveals hesitation, uncertainty, or resistance that words would hide. Breaking silence too early robs you of information. Camp also addresses the danger of statements that seek validation. Phrases like, "Does that make sense?" or "Are we on the same page?" push for reassurance instead of understanding. They invite polite agreement rather than honest feedback. Professionals do not ask for validation, they ask for reality. Another key idea is avoiding defensive language. When challenged, people instinctively justify, explain, or correct. Camp teaches that defensiveness signals attachment. It shows that you are protecting an outcome rather than exploring truth. Instead of defending, acknowledge and inquire. If someone pushes back, respond with curiosity. Ask what is behind the resistance. Ask what concern has not been addressed. This keeps the conversation productive without surrendering position. Camp's language discipline also includes avoiding absolute statements. Words like always, never, or everyone invite contradiction. They turn negotiation into argument. Neutral language stays specific and conditional. This chapter reinforces that negotiation is not about sounding smart. It is about staying clean. Clean language keeps emotions low. Low emotions keep information flowing. When you control your language, you control your behavior. When you control your behavior, you protect your mission. Language does not close deals. Language reveals reality. And reality, not optimism, is what leads to good decisions. Chapter 7. How do you say it? Tone, delivery, discipline. If language is the structure of negotiation, tone is its atmosphere. Jim Camp is clear on this point. People respond to emotional signals before they respond to logic. You can use perfect words and still fail if your tone reveals urgency, anxiety, or attachment. Conversely, you can say very little and still maintain control if your delivery is calm, neutral, and grounded. Professionals sound different. They are slower, they are quieter, they are less reactive. This is not performance, it is discipline. Camp teaches that tone communicates need faster than words ever could. A rushed voice signals urgency. A defensive tone signals insecurity. Excessive enthusiasm signals attachment. Even friendliness, when exaggerated, can signal fear of rejection. The goal is not to sound cold. The goal is to sound steady. Steadiness creates safety. Safety creates openness. Openness creates information. Camp emphasizes pacing as a critical element of control. Most people speak too quickly when they feel pressure. They rush to fill silence. They interrupt. They finish other people's sentences. All of this signals internal tension. Professional negotiators slow everything down. They allow pauses. They allow unfinished thoughts. They allow silence to stretch. Silence is not awkward when you are calm. It only feels awkward when you are afraid of what might happen next. Camp points out that silence often does the heavy lifting. When you ask a neutral question and remain silent, the other side feels compelled to respond. In that response, they often reveal what matters most to them. Talking too soon interrupts this process. Tone also affects how no is received. When no is delivered emotionally, it feels aggressive. When delivered neutrally, it feels safe. Camp insists that no should never be accompanied by explanation or apology. Explaining no invites debate. Apologizing for no undermines confidence. A simple, calm no preserves clarity. Another key concept in this chapter is emotional containment. Camp argues that emotions are inevitable, but expression is optional. Feeling frustration does not require displaying it. Feeling excitement does not require sharing it. Emotional discipline means noticing emotion without acting on it. This restraint protects negotiation from escalation. When emotions escalate, logic disappears. People begin defending identity rather than solving problems. Tone becomes sharp. Listening collapses. Camp teaches negotiators to remain emotionally neutral even when provoked. This does not mean suppressing emotion permanently. It means choosing when and where emotion belongs. Camp also warns against mirroring emotional intensity. Many people unconsciously match the other side's energy. If the other side becomes aggressive, they become defensive. If the other side becomes enthusiastic, they become excited. This emotional mirroring destroys balance. Professionals remain constant. Their tone does not rise with pressure. Their pace does not accelerate with urgency. Their posture does not collapse under confrontation. This constancy unsettles aggressive tactics and calms anxious ones. Another practical insight is that emotional discipline builds credibility over time. When people see that you do not overreact, they trust your responses more. They stop testing boundaries. They stop posturing. They engage with substance. Camp also addresses the role of empathy in tone. Empathy does not mean agreement. It means acknowledgement. You can acknowledge emotion without validating position. This keeps conversations human without sacrificing clarity. For example, acknowledging concern without offering concession preserves balance. You recognize reality without accepting responsibility for fixing it. This chapter reinforces a central theme of Camp's system. Negotiation is not a battle of arguments. It is a test of self-control. The person who manages themselves best controls the process. Tone is the outward expression of that control. When you master delivery, your words carry less pressure. Your questions land more cleanly. Your silences feel intentional. You stop signaling need without realizing it. You become predictable in the best way. Calm, clear, unrushed, and in negotiation, that presence is power. Chapter 8. Quiet your mind, create a blank slate. Most negotiations are lost before the first word is spoken, not because of strategy, but because of noise. Jim Camp uses the term noise to describe the constant internal chatter that fills the mind before and during negotiation. Assumptions, expectations, fears, predictions, internal arguments about what might happen and what must not happen. This noise distorts perception and drives emotional reactions. A noisy mind cannot negotiate well. When your mind is crowded, you listen poorly. You interpret instead of hearing. You react instead of responding. You negotiate with a script running in your head rather than with the person in front of you. Camp's solution is the blank slate. A blank slate is not ignorance, it is discipline. It is the conscious decision to enter negotiation without assumptions about motives, outcomes, or intentions. You clear the internal narrative and commit to discovering reality rather than confirming beliefs. This is harder than it sounds. Human beings are prediction machines. We imagine rejection before it happens. We assume resistance before it appears. We create stories about power, budget, authority, and interest before any evidence exists. These stories feel protective, but they are dangerous. They cause us to negotiate with ghosts. Camp insists that professionals work actively to quiet the mind before every negotiation. This means acknowledging internal thoughts without engaging them, not suppressing them, but refusing to follow them. Preparation plays a key role here. When mission and purpose are clear, the mind has less reason to race. When walking away is real, fear loses urgency. When no is acceptable, silence feels safer. The blank slate allows curiosity to replace anxiety. Curiosity is central to Camp's system. You cannot be curious if you are emotionally invested in a specific outcome. Curiosity requires openness. Openness requires calm. Calm requires discipline. Camp teaches negotiators to notice when the mind drifts into prediction. When this happens, return to the present moment. Focus on what is being said, not what it might mean. Focus on tone, pacing, hesitation, and choice of words. These are data points. Stories are not. This chapter also addresses the danger of labeling. When you label someone as difficult, unreasonable, or uninterested, you stop listening. Labels end curiosity. They lock perception. Camp encourages negotiators to treat every label as a warning sign that the blank slate has been lost. Professionals replace labels with questions. Another important insight is that emotional reactions often come from internal expectations, not external behavior. Someone says something unexpected, and frustration appears. But the frustration does not come from the statement itself. It comes from the violation of an internal script. Remove the script, and the reaction disappears. Camp emphasizes breathing, pacing, and silence as tools to maintain the blank slate. Slowing down physically helps slow down mentally. Allowing silence creates space between stimulus and response. In that space, choice becomes possible. This discipline is especially important when negotiations become tense. Under pressure, the mind seeks control. It tries to predict and force resolution. Camp teaches that this is precisely the moment to return to the blank slate. Let the other side talk. Let the discomfort exist. Let clarity emerge. The blank slate also protects against manipulation. When you are not emotionally invested in a story, tactics lose their effect. Deadlines become information. Aggression becomes data. Enthusiasm becomes a signal, not an invitation. This chapter reinforces that negotiation is not about being clever. It is about being present. Presence allows you to hear what others miss. Presence allows you to stay calm when others rush. Presence allows you to respond instead of react. Quieting the mind does not make negotiation passive. It makes it precise. When the noise fades, reality becomes audible. And reality is always more useful than expectation. Chapter 9. Know their pain. Most negotiators focus on positions. They listen for demands, prices, timelines, terms. They hear what the other side says they want and assume that is the problem to solve. Jim Camp argues that this is a fundamental mistake. Positions are surface level. Pain is the driver underneath. Until you understand pain, you do not understand the negotiation. In Camp's system, pain does not mean suffering in a dramatic sense. It means any problem, risk, pressure, fear, or constraint that the other side is trying to resolve. People negotiate to escape pain, not to achieve abstract outcomes. Positions are often poor attempts to solve pain. For example, a demand for speed may hide fear of internal deadlines. A demand for price may hide risk exposure. A demand for control may hide lack of authority. If you negotiate positions, you treat symptoms. If you uncover pain, you address causes. Camp insists that understanding pain is the real work of negotiation. This requires discipline because people rarely state their pain directly. They talk around it. They disguise it as logic, policy, or preference. Sometimes they are not even fully aware of it themselves. Your job is not to fix their pain. Your job is to understand it clearly. Understanding pain begins with curiosity. Camp emphasizes asking open, neutral questions that invite the other side to describe problems rather than defend positions. Questions like, what is driving this concern? What happens if this does not get resolved? What risks are you trying to avoid? These questions are not confrontational. They signal that you are listening without agenda. When people feel heard, they talk more honestly. Camp also warns against assuming pain. Many negotiators think they already know what the other side wants or fears. These assumptions create blind spots. The blank slate discipline from the previous chapter is essential here. You must discover pain, not project it. Another key insight is that pain is often emotional, not logical. Fear of failure, fear of blame, fear of loss of control, fear of appearing incompetent. These emotions influence decisions far more than spreadsheets or logic models. Camp does not suggest exploiting this. He suggests recognizing it. Ignoring emotional pain leads to stalled negotiations. You may present perfect solutions that go nowhere because the real issue was never addressed. Camp also explains that pain exists on both sides, but professional negotiators focus on the other side first. When you understand their pain, you can decide whether alignment is possible. When you focus on your own pain too early, you become attached and reactive. Knowing their pain does not mean agreeing to solve it. This is a critical distinction. Many people hear pain and immediately rush to offer solutions. This creates pressure and obligation. Camp teaches restraint. You acknowledge pain, you explore it, you let it exist without fixing it. This patience builds trust and reveals depth. Often, the first layer of pain is not the real one. Only through continued listening does the deeper issue appear. Camp encourages negotiators to stay with discomfort rather than rushing toward resolution. Silence is again a tool here. After someone describes a problem, pause, let them continue. People often reveal more when they sense that you are not trying to rescue them. Camp also emphasizes that pain creates urgency. If there is no pain, there is no deal. If the other side is comfortable, negotiation has no momentum. This does not mean creating pain. It means recognizing whether it exists. When pain is absent, walking away may be the correct move. This chapter also applies to everyday interactions. In relationships, conflicts are often about unmet emotional needs, not surface arguments. In careers, dissatisfaction often comes from misalignment, not workload. Camp's framework encourages deeper listening in all areas of life. Understanding pain changes the tone of negotiation. You stop arguing. You stop persuading. You start listening. And when people feel understood, they stop defending positions and start discussing reality. Pain is not weakness. Pain is information. When you learn to hear it clearly, negotiation stops being a contest and becomes an investigation. Chapter 10. The real budget. Time, energy, emotion. When people hear the word budget, they think of money. Jim Camp argues that this is a narrow and misleading view. In negotiation, money is often the least important cost. The real budget is time, energy, and emotional investment. These are the resources people lose most easily and recover most slowly. Bad negotiations do not just cost money. They drain focus, create stress, and occupy mental space long after the conversation ends. Camp insists that professional negotiators protect their real budget above all else. Time is the first hidden cost. Many negotiations drag on because no one is willing to face reality. Meetings repeat themselves. Conversations circle the same points. Emails suggest progress without delivering clarity. People stay engaged because walking away feels uncomfortable, even when nothing is changing. Camp teaches that time spent without new information is waste. Professionals measure progress not by activity, but by clarity. If no new understanding is emerging, the negotiation is stalled. Continuing out of politeness or hope only increases cost. Protecting time requires the courage to pause or disengage when value is no longer being created. Energy is the second cost. Negotiations consume mental and emotional energy. Constantly preparing, reacting, and worrying drains attention from other priorities. Camp warns that people often underestimate how much energy bad negotiations consume. They carry unresolved tension into other parts of life, affecting performance and decision-making. When you are emotionally attached to outcome, energy drains quickly. When you operate from mission and process, energy stabilizes. You engage when necessary and disengage when appropriate. This discipline preserves focus. Emotion is the most dangerous cost. Emotional investment clouds judgment. It makes people defend positions they should question. It makes them accept terms they would reject calmly. It makes them continue negotiations long after alignment has disappeared. Camp teaches negotiators to treat emotion as information, not fuel. You notice it, you acknowledge it internally, but you do not allow it to drive decisions. Emotional discipline protects you from escalating commitment to bad deals. This chapter also introduces the idea that negotiations should earn continued investment. Each interaction should justify the time, energy, and emotion spent. If a negotiation consistently creates confusion, pressure, or exhaustion, that is, data, it signals misalignment. Professionals ask themselves simple questions. Is new information emerging? Is clarity increasing? Is alignment becoming more likely? If the answer is no, continuing becomes a choice, not an obligation. Camp emphasizes that protecting your real budget requires the ability to say no without guilt. Many people stay in negotiations because they fear appearing uncooperative or uncommitted. Camp rejects this. Commitment to bad processes is not professionalism, it is self-sabotage. This principle extends beyond negotiation. In careers, people stay in draining roles out of habit. In relationships, they remain in dynamics that consume emotional energy without growth. Camp's framework encourages evaluation based on cost, not hope. Money can often be replaced. Time cannot. Energy must be renewed. Emotion, once depleted, distorts judgment. Understanding the real budget changes how you define success. Success is not agreement at any cost. Success is preserving your resources while pursuing alignment. Walking away from a draining negotiation can be a win even if no deal is reached. This chapter reinforces a central theme. Discipline is protection. When you protect your real budget, you negotiate from strength, you remain patient, you avoid burnout. You make decisions based on clarity rather than exhaustion. Negotiation becomes sustainable rather than consuming. And when you protect what truly matters, you stop paying for agreements you never should have made. Chapter 11. The Shell Game. Be sure you know the real decision makers. One of the most common and costly mistakes in negotiation is believing you are speaking to the decision maker when you are not. Jim Camp calls this the shell game. You think you are negotiating with someone who has authority, but the real power sits elsewhere. Decisions are delayed, reversed, or quietly undermined, and the negotiation stalls without clear explanation. Professionals assume authority must be proven, not presumed. Camp emphasizes that titles do not equal decision power. Someone may have influence, information, or access, but not authority. Negotiating as if they do leads to frustration and wasted effort. You present solutions to people who cannot say yes, and you receive polite engagement that goes nowhere. This is how time, energy, and emotion are drained. Camp teaches negotiators to verify authority early, without confrontation. Not by demanding credentials, but by asking neutral, revealing questions. Questions that clarify process rather than challenge status. For example, who else will need to be comfortable with this decision? How are decisions like this usually made? What happens after this conversation? These questions expose structure without accusation. The shell game often persists because people are afraid to ask. They worry about offending. They worry about appearing distrustful. Camp argues that this fear is misplaced. Clarity is respectful. Assumption is risky. When authority is unclear, negotiation becomes symbolic. Conversations feel productive, but no commitments hold. Agreements dissolve once the unseen decision-maker reviews them. Camp warns that this is not betrayal. It is structure asserting itself. Understanding structure prevents disappointment. Camp also explains that people sometimes hide behind lack of authority to avoid discomfort. Saying, "I'll have to check," or "someone else decides," allows them to avoid taking responsibility. This is not deception. It is self-protection. Professionals recognize this and respond calmly. Instead of pushing harder, they pause. They ask about the decision process. They assess whether continuing makes sense. Sometimes the correct move is to request access to the decision maker. Sometimes it is to disengage entirely. The key is not forcing progress where authority does not exist. Camp emphasizes that negotiating with non-decision makers is not always useless. These individuals can provide valuable information about priorities, constraints, and internal politics, but professionals treat these conversations as information gathering, not closing. Clarity about role keeps expectations realistic. Another insight in this chapter is that decision makers are not always individuals. Sometimes authority is distributed across committees, policies, or timelines. Negotiating effectively requires understanding these systems. You do not fight systems, you navigate them. Camp discourages emotional reactions when authority issues arise. Feeling misled or frustrated only signals attachment. Instead, treat authority gaps as data. They tell you how the organization actually functions. This chapter also reinforces the importance of walking away. If access to decision authority is blocked and clarity is impossible, Continuing may violate your mission. Professionals leave without drama. They protect their real budget. In life beyond negotiation, the shell game appears everywhere. In workplaces, decisions seem promised and then vanish. In relationships, commitments shift depending on unseen pressures. Camp's framework encourages people to seek clarity rather than reassurance. Who decides matters more than what is discussed. When you negotiate with the wrong person, even perfect terms fail. When you negotiate with the right authority, even difficult conversations become productive. This chapter sharpens perception. It teaches you to see structure instead of personality, process instead of performance. Once you know who decides, negotiation becomes real. Until then, it is only rehearsal. Chapter 12. Have an agenda and work it. Most negotiations drift. They begin with good intentions and end in confusion. Topics jump around, emotions interrupt logic. Important issues are skipped while minor ones consume attention. Jim Camp argues that this happens because people enter negotiations without a clear agenda, or they abandon it the moment pressure appears. Professionals do not drift. They work an agenda. An agenda, in Camp's system, is not a list of demands. It is a structured plan for discovering information. It outlines what must be understood before any decision can be made. Without it, negotiations become reactive and emotional. Camp insists that your agenda must be prepared in advance and tied directly to your mission and purpose. It should focus on questions, not positions, clarity, not persuasion, understanding, not agreement. A good agenda answers questions like, what information do I need before making a decision? What risks must be clarified? What authority must be verified? What pain must be understood? This preparation prevents you from being pulled into premature solutions. One of the biggest dangers Camp identifies is allowing the other side's agenda to dominate the conversation. When this happens, you respond instead of explore. You defend instead of discover. You chase issues that matter to them before understanding whether alignment exists. Professionals respect the other side's concerns without surrendering structure. Camp teaches negotiators to gently but firmly guide conversations back to the agenda when drift occurs. This is not control of outcome, it is control of process. Process discipline protects clarity. Another key principle in this chapter is sequencing. Not all topics belong at the same time. Some issues must be explored before others make sense. Jumping ahead creates confusion and false momentum. Camp advises negotiators to slow the pace and work through issues in order. This sequencing prevents emotional escalation. When people rush ahead, unresolved concerns linger beneath the surface. They resurface later as resistance or renegotiation. Working the agenda methodically reduces surprises and builds trust. Camp also emphasizes that agendas are flexible, not rigid. New information may require adjustment. The discipline is not in forcing the agenda, but in returning to purpose when distractions appear. Emotion is the primary distraction. When tension rises, people abandon structure. They argue. They justify. They attempt to close. Camp teaches that this is precisely when the agenda matters most. Structure brings calm. Calm restores clarity. Another insight in this chapter is that an agenda protects against manipulation. Tactics like urgency, flattery, or pressure lose power when the conversation remains grounded in questions. The agenda acts as an anchor. It prevents emotional hijacking. Camp also points out that agendas signal professionalism. When you operate with clarity and patience, the other side adjusts. They take the conversation more seriously. They prepare more carefully. They reveal more information. This is especially important in complex negotiations with multiple stakeholders. Without an agenda, conversations become fragmented. With one, patterns emerge. The agenda also protects your real budget. It prevents endless meetings without progress. It gives you criteria for evaluating whether continuing makes sense. If the agenda cannot be advanced, disengagement becomes logical rather than emotional. Beyond negotiation, this principle applies to life. Many conflicts persist because conversations lack structure. Issues repeat without resolution. Camp's approach encourages intentional dialogue instead of reactive exchange. An agenda does not guarantee agreement, it guarantees clarity, and clarity is what allows good decisions to be made calmly. When you work your agenda, you stop reacting to pressure and start responding to reality. You stay aligned with your mission. You preserve discipline. Negotiation becomes less chaotic and more honest. Chapter 13. Present your case. Insist on clarity. Up to this point, Jim Camp has emphasized listening, restraint, and discovery. This often leads people to wonder when, or if, they should ever present their own position. Chapter 13 answers that question clearly. You present your case only after clarity exists. And when you do it without pressure. Camp warns that most people present too early. They rush to explain value before understanding pain. They argue solutions before identifying decision authority. They pitch outcomes before confirming alignment. This turns presentation into persuasion, and persuasion triggers resistance. Professionals wait. Presenting your case is not about convincing the other side to agree. It is about stating your position cleanly so it can be evaluated honestly. Camp insists that your case must be clear, concise, and unemotional. Anything else signals attachment. Clarity, not enthusiasm, is persuasive. Camp teaches that presenting your case should feel almost anticlimactic. No build-up, no dramatic framing, no emotional language, just facts, conditions, and boundaries stated calmly. This approach surprises people because it removes pressure. When pressure disappears, evaluation becomes possible. Another key principle in this chapter is insisting on clarity before moving forward. Camp argues that many negotiations collapse later because clarity was sacrificed early for momentum. People assume agreement where only politeness existed. They proceed without resolving ambiguity, hoping it will work itself out. Professionals do not hope. Insisting on clarity means confirming understanding without forcing commitment. It means asking neutral questions like, what part of this concerns you? What is unclear at this point? What would prevent this from working? These questions invite honesty. They allow objections to surface without confrontation. Camp emphasizes that objections are not obstacles. They are information. When objections appear, professionals do not argue. They explore. They let resistance explain itself. Often, resistance is rooted in unresolved pain or structural constraints. Clarifying these issues is more productive than defending your position. Camp also warns against mistaking silence or politeness for agreement. Just because someone nods does not mean they accept. Insisting on clarity means verifying understanding explicitly, without emotional pressure. If clarity cannot be achieved, walking away remains an option. Presenting your case does not obligate you to continue. It is a step in evaluation, not a commitment. Another important insight is that clarity protects relationships. Many conflicts arise not from disagreement but from misunderstood expectations. By presenting your case calmly and insisting on clarity, you reduce future resentment. This chapter reinforces that negotiation is not a performance. It is a process of alignment. Presenting your case is simply sharing information so both sides can decide responsibly. Camp's system rejects persuasion as manipulation. Instead, it promotes transparency. You say what you can do. You say what you cannot do. You state conditions without apology. You invite response without attachment. This approach feels slower, but it saves time long-term. When clarity exists, decisions happen naturally. When clarity is missing, decisions unravel later. Chapter 13 prepares us for the final lesson of the book. After discipline, detachment, listening, and clarity, Camp turns to the deepest insight of all, the principle that governs not just negotiation, but life. Chapter 14. Life's greatest lesson, only assurance of long-term success. Jim Camp closes, "Start with no," by pulling back from tactics and revealing what the system has really been about all along. Negotiation, he argues, is not a skill you turn on and off. It is a reflection of how you relate to uncertainty, pressure, and yourself. The principles that create strong negotiations are the same principles that create stable lives. The greatest lesson is simple, but difficult to live. Success comes from discipline, not control. People who struggle in negotiation often struggle in life for the same reason. They chase outcomes, they seek validation, they fear no, they rush to resolve discomfort. They trade long-term stability for short-term relief. Negotiation merely exposes these habits under pressure. Camp's system trains you to operate differently. When you eliminate need, you stop defining yourself by external approval. When you can walk away, you stop tolerating misalignment. When you accept no, you stop fearing rejection. When you focus on mission, you stop drifting. When you protect your real budget, you stop exhausting yourself. These are not tricks, they are signs of maturity. Camp emphasizes that long-term success is not about winning individual negotiations. It is about building a reputation for clarity, calm, and integrity. People trust those who are consistent. They respect those who do not overreact. They engage seriously with those who do not chase agreement. This reputation compounds over time. Another key insight is that discipline creates freedom. When you are emotionally self-controlled, fewer situations control you. Pressure loses power. Deadlines lose intimidation. Conflict loses drama. You can choose rather than react. Camp contrasts this with reactive living, where people feel constantly rushed, manipulated, and drained. In that state, negotiation becomes survival. In a disciplined state, negotiation becomes evaluation. The assurance of long-term success does not come from mastering persuasion. It comes from mastering yourself. Camp also returns to the concept of no as protection. In life, as in negotiation, saying no preserves energy, values, and direction. People who cannot say no become overextended and resentful. People who say no calmly remain aligned. This final chapter reinforces that discipline must be practiced daily, not just in high-stakes negotiations, but in conversations, commitments, and choices. The same rules apply whether the stakes are money, time, or identity. Camp does not promise ease, he promises clarity. Clarity about what you want. Clarity about what you will not accept. Clarity about when to engage and when to walk away. That clarity becomes stability. Stability becomes confidence. Confidence becomes influence. The book ends not with motivation, but with responsibility. If you choose discipline, you give up excuses. You stop blaming circumstances. You stop negotiating against yourself. You begin living intentionally. Negotiation stops being something you do. It becomes how you think. And when you start with no, you finally give yourself permission to choose what truly fits. Conclusion: Dance with the Tiger, Principles to Remember. This mini-book did not teach you how to win negotiations. It taught you how to stop losing them. Jim Camp's system strips negotiation down to something quieter and more demanding than persuasion. It asks for discipline instead of charisma, clarity instead of optimism, and self-control instead of pressure. These qualities are not dramatic. They do not announce themselves, but they endure. Across these chapters, a consistent pattern emerged. Every failure in negotiation traces back to the same source: emotional attachment to outcome. Need creates urgency. Urgency creates mistakes. Mistakes compound quietly until a deal collapses or a life fills with commitments that never truly fit. Camp offers a different path. When you start with no, you give yourself permission to think. When you can walk away, you reclaim freedom. When you focus on mission instead of outcome, you stop drifting. When you quiet the mind, you see reality instead of stories. When you listen for pain, you understand what actually drives decisions. When you protect your real budget, you preserve your future. None of this is aggressive. None of it is manipulative. It is grounded. This approach changes how you negotiate, but more importantly, it changes how you relate to pressure. You stop rushing to resolve discomfort. You stop chasing approval. You stop negotiating against yourself. Negotiation becomes evaluation. Conversation becomes discovery. Choice becomes intentional. The discipline Jim Camp teaches is not about saying no to others. It is about saying no to fear, urgency, and emotional shortcuts. It is about choosing clarity over comfort and alignment over agreement. In a world that rewards speed and certainty, this discipline feels radical. But it is also stabilizing. It gives you the confidence to pause, to ask better questions, to leave when something does not fit. When you start with no, you do not close doors, you protect the right ones, and that is where real success begins. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoy our summary based on inspiration to do something great in our life. I look forward to see you in next mini-books. Don't forget to subscribe and like. This helps us reach more and more people. All the best, and take care of yourselves.